Hello and welcome to tonight's Truth Proof. Tonight we've got a great guest on tonight, as per usual. We've got Paul Sinclair, who's asking the questions for our guest, and it's a very interesting subject actually. But first of all, I'd like to say thank you everybody for all the support that we've had over the recent weeks and months. It's greatly appreciated. We've got to thank Paul Gledhill for being our moderator tonight. Thanks, Paul, for your coming in at last minute. And I'm just going to have a look, see who's in the chat stream. So we'll just leave it a few seconds, and while everybody gets onto the stream, I'll just give a few name shouts out. We've got, in no particular order, Stephen Giles, Michael Adams, Rebecca King, uh, is that Alligator Software, and Ralph Windsor. Let's have a look. Nick Exploration, welcome to the show, Nick. Stargazer, Alison Buttle, and Mary Bauer Williams. Vic McCrinnan, VC McCrinnan. Yes, I'll get that right. Sorry about that. Yeah, welcome everybody to the show tonight. So it's everybody from around the UK and around the world. Without further ado, we're going to kick off right now. Like I say, welcome everybody to tonight's Truth Proof live stream. Without further ado, we will be going to Paul and his guest. Welcome.
Thank you, Les. Another another week's come round fast, and we've got a fabulous guest to talk to tonight. I'm really looking forward to speaking with Roland Watson, sea serpent, monster researcher, all things beneath the lakes, rivers and oceans of the world, but more importantly, I would say Loch Ness. Roland, welcome to Truth Proof.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
You're welcome. And I suppose we want to start with, because we've got, an hour, 2 hours, a little background information on yourself and how you became interested in the subject of the Loch Ness Monster.
Sure. Well, I've been interested in the monster for a good 40 years now. Back when I was a kid, back in the 1970s, I was always interested in mysterious things, ghosts, UFOs, Bigfoot. But because I lived in Scotland, and I still do, I was naturally attracted to Scotland's one major mystery, number one, which is the Loch Ness Monster. So back in the 1970s, we had a lot of Nessie fever, as I call it. Around that time, there was a lot of books, a lot of talk, a lot of chat, a lot of expeditions going on, which naturally would attract a kid like me. We also had an interest in dinosaurs and that kind of stuff. So naturally, the two things came together, and I was, always reading up what was in the newspapers, buying the latest books, and even doing a bit of analysis myself as a teenager. So that went through right through to the 80s, the 90s, dipped a bit as I took on a job, a career, and then I got married, had kids. So all that, as you may well know, you look a bit my age. These things take priority even over Nessie. So I would say that about 20 years ago, kids were kind of semi-independent. I began to look again. By this time, the wonderful internet had arrived, and there was a few websites around, and I joined in a few of them. But by about 2010, I was really thinking, as an imbalance here in the internet debate about Nessie. It was a very skeptical environment. Which is fine in and of itself. We like a bit of debate. But I thought I'd try and add some balance to it by starting a blog, Loch Ness Mystery, I call it, mainly because someone had taken Loch Ness Monster.
Yeah.
So I began posting my own thoughts. I began to ramp up, began to do more research, began to publish books, uh, some of which are anthologies of my blog, but others are new material and so on. So I've written 4 books now on the subject. One on kelpies, water horses, that historical background. One on when Nessie comes ashore. Not just a water creature. And I've published also on photographs of the Loch Ness Monster, the good, the bad, and ugly. Because believe me, there's a lot of good and there's a lot of bad, and there's probably a lot of ugly around the photographs of Loch Ness Monster. So I've really for a good 10 years at this. The blog's still running. It's covered about 800 articles now since I started. I'm enjoying every minute of it, and we're still going on.
How were you received, Roland, by some of these people who've taken photographs that claim to be the real thing, and you've analysed them in a good way, but concluded that they're not the real thing? Has it caused animosity, or do you just not get any feedback from people?
Oh, plenty of feedback.
Yeah.
Good, bad, and ugly, as I said. So as I said, there was a bit of a skeptical slant to things. So I've taken up a pro-Nessie stance.
Right.
So that means that I am somewhat biased and prejudiced towards the mystery being an unknown animal. And I think that's perfectly fine because all the skeptics are probably, even though they won't admit it, they have a degree of bias and prejudice as well. There's no Mr. Spocks out there who are devoid of emotion and think pure logic. We'll have our little agendas. I'm free to admit I have my own. So we try to balance out the bias and the prejudice. People basically have to read my writings, read other writings, and form their own opinions. And ultimately, they are the judge and jury, not me, not any other expert. So when it comes to photographs, basically, some are pretty easy to spot as fakes. I mean, there's photographs you get 100% agreement right across the spectrum from those who believe to those who don't. Then we get into the middle ground, where people who believe in the Loch Ness Monster, some think it will be a photograph of it, some don't. I think a lot of photographs are in that area, and then you go over to the other side of the spectrum where there's some good quality photographs. But even then, we tend to find that not everyone. It's pretty hard to find one single photograph which has 100% agreement. Obviously, not for people who don't believe in monster, but 100% for those who believe in there's some kind of large animal in the loch.
Yeah.
We'll have our little ways of approaching photographs, little details that we might see, or circumstances it was taken, and some people might think there's something dodgy about the person who took it, and so on. A lot of it's sometimes hearsay, and it's in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah.
Like UFO photographs, really.
Exactly. Yeah, I would agree. Have you ever been told about photographs that exist that have never got to the public eye?
Yeah. So admittedly, they're not as numerous as the ones we know that are out there. There's a famous McCrae film, which was taken about 1934, which is partly the be all and end all of Nessie films. It shows a grey creature with leathery skin taken about 100 yards away, showing its long neck, rolling in the water, and with humps which are undulating and shape shifting. Now at the time, there's allegedly some trustees of the film held it in a bank vault. This was discovered in the 1960s by a researcher, monster hunter called Ted Holliday. He followed up while he spoke to various people and was quite convinced there was a film out there. Now, this was back in 1934, so we're talking about 80 odd years now, and some people have we very much doubt this film is watchable now on silver nitrate film, which is quite combustible in the wrong circumstances. Though people have found films which still play well after such a long time. But after such a long time, I think we have to conclude that there's no such film. There may have been a sighting which had been exaggerated and put out of context, but I'm not holding my breath for anything that is that old coming back to light.
No.
There are some others, but that's the prime. That is a famous one.
So,
a mystery within a mystery.
Yeah. So, Roland, do you want to start and tell us a little bit about some of the earlier or the earliest reports of the Loch Ness monster that there are out there?
Let's start right back at the beginning.
Yes,
Go
please.
back into not quite prehistory. We haven't yet found any rock carvings of Nessie or anything like that. But going back to the 7th, 6th century AD, we have the Picts, who were the natives of the area around Loch Ness back then. And St. Columba was a missionary from Ireland. He came over with various other missionaries to convert the Picts and all the other heathen in Scotland. So his biography, or shall we call it a hagiography, contains a story about how he encountered a water beast in the River Ness, or possibly in Loch Ness itself, depending on how you interpret those words, river. So he basically sent over one of his converts, Lugne Macocum, a strange name, but very Pictish, to go over and get a boat. This was in the backdrop of someone had been killed by this monster. So according to the story, the monster notices the vibration of the water of someone moving and leaps out of the water, mouth open, ready to devour the poor unfortunate man. At which point, St. Columba holds up, makes the sign of the cross and says, "In the name of God, go back." At which point, then the creature stops dead in its tracks if it hit a brick wall and puts in a complete reverse and disappears, thus impressing the Picts with his Christian powers.
Yeah.
Now, I wouldn't call that an eyewitness report. You could have a bit of gloss and all that, but the fact that it happened in Loch Ness, of all places, why didn't it happen in Loch Lomond or
Yeah,
the River Clyde
you make a good
or the
point.
river or up in the Murray Firth? So people normally take that as the first mention of a strange beast in that region. But things get very quiet after that. There's not a lot. I mean, there's not a lot of Scottish writing for that period anyway, so you have very little chance of finding anything to do with this beast.
Do you
But
just to before we move away from that? Do you he talks about this thing leaping out of the water? How much of that? I know we'll never know. Do you think it's been distorted over time? So there's probably an original, a genuine sighting or report of something unusual, but how much has been romanticized about that, do you think?
well, the bit about it breaking the water and rushing to eat the
Yes.
man is fictional.
Yes.
Because the Loch Ness monster has never been recorded as injuring or killing anyone.
That's what I meant. I wanted your stance on that. I'm pretty sure that's where you were going to be with it anyway. But yeah, that's.
But it's the fact that it was mentioned. The beast is not described. It's just called an Aquatilis beastii in Latin, which just means a water creature.
Yeah.
It's obviously big and imposing and had the dread of the Picts. So going on from that, we have by that time we had the folklore building up of water kelpies, water horses, water bulls. These are kind of Celtic water spirits. They started off that way. They'd be worshipped by the Celts or the Picts. They may have thrown in sacrifices in the loch to appease them. We're not actually showing the details because not much has been left behind. The Picts didn't leave much in the way of writing. I don't think there's any writing.
No.
Only what we know through the missionaries, such as Columba and his biographers. So these legends persisted throughout the centuries of these creatures that lie submerged in the waters of deep, dark lochs and rivers and so on. But the way it panned out was once the anthropologists, the Victorian anthropologists, began to go up to Scotland and collect all these stories. At this time, Scotland was benefiting from the Industrial Revolution. People were beginning to migrate out of the Highlands, and the old ways were beginning to get lost, you see. So quite fortunately, these people began to go up to the Highlands and Islands to collect all kinds of stories. And in the case of Loch Ness, they got the locals telling them about these creatures that were shapeshifters, basically. By this time, they'd been kind of demonized by the church, these water spirits, and turned into ferocious man-eating beasts who would shapeshift into an ordinary horse with a nice saddle and wait by the side of the loch, waiting for a tired passerby, traveller, he or she would get on the horse thinking they were in for an easy ride. They would then supernaturally stick to the horse, at which point the identity of the water horse would be revealed. It would leap back into the loch in its true form and kill its victim and eat him alive. So these things were held in dread by the locals. If they even saw them, they wouldn't even talk about it. They think there's bad luck and bring a curse upon them to talk about these supernatural beasts. And these beliefs persisted right in towards the end of the 19th century, according to our anthropologists and historians. But they were harking back to stories which went back for centuries. And you have various stories about the adventures of water horses. Water bulls were the more benign version. They were actually more friendly to man. Kelpies were river monsters, so they didn't really inhabit Loch Ness, but the two terms get mixed up. So, and the other thing to mention is during the time of Oliver Cromwell, we had a foot soldier called Richard Frank, who wrote a travel log called Northern Memoirs about 1680. And he talked about the floating island of Loch Ness,
Right.
which we take to be a kind of large hump, the large back, being seen in Loch Ness. And he said, well, this Cromwell foot soldier would turn out to be the first skeptic, because he tried to explain it away as a vegetable mat
Right.
floating about the loch, made of bulrushes.
Yeah.
But there are no bulrushes at Loch Ness, so I think he's just making this up as he went along. And he never actually tested the theory. But then we also have, going to the 19th century, the newspapers picked up one or two stories about a gigantic fish that inhabited Loch Ness. But they didn't take this story seriously. None of the papers took the story of Loch Ness seriously back in the 19th century. They talked about a huge fish gambling in Loch Ness, seen by the natives, as they called them. So they called the natives incredulous, or
Yeah.
credulous rather, because they basically took their story of a large pinch of salt. That takes us basically up to the modern era, which we can cover as well. But that's basically the historical, legendary, mythical background to the Loch Ness monster.
The Loch Ness monster. Yeah. Then you talked about a huge fish. What?
Hmm.
And there'll be salmon in Loch. Is the trout in Loch as well? I don't know.
Seasonally, yeah.
Yeah. So what other fish do we have? Sturgeon in the Loch?
No,
No. So
we
what?
we
One. Sorry.
the largest known fish are probably pike
All right. They're only going to
and
get to
eel,
30 or
maybe.
40 pound, aren't they? You know, a pike. It's not going to.
Yeah, not very big.
No. No.
Pike, eel are further down the loch, deeper down. Most of the fish are Arctic char. You have a few fish that have been introduced by the locals, like carp and so on. Some people have speculated whether there are catfish in the loch,
Yeah.
because catfish were introduced to various lochs for the fishermen coming up from the south, the gentry, and but it's never been proven that catfish have ever been in Loch Ness or sturgeon.
No. Right.
These are. I mean, we have various newspaper accounts from the 19th century of sturgeon being found in various localities around northeast Scotland, but no one ever mentions a sturgeon being caught, and you'd be pretty sure that it would have been made in newspapers if it had.
Yeah.
So sometimes eels as well. No, I don't think anything bigger than 3 foot's been caught, but some people once again think that there are bigger eel in Loch Ness, which is
Yeah. But
actually one of the favourite theories.
some of the things that have been described, though, aren't 3 or 4 foot, are they? They're a lot larger. So it's probably a theory that's not going to hold water, should we say? Pardon the pun. So where do you want to go with this now? Do you want to go to the birth of the modern monster, as you term it, Roland?
Yeah, let's start at the real beginning.
Yeah.
So I mean, up to the 30s, there have been rumours of something being seen in Loch. We have a press clipping from 1930, for example, about something being seen. But it didn't really start until 2nd of May, 1933. The local newspaper, the Inverness Courier, published an article saying called "Strange Spectacle on Loch Ness," which described anonymously a couple had seen two large humps in the water, just sporting like at the back of a whale. It turned out later, there was one witness, Naldi Mackay, who was the wife of a hotel proprietor in Drumnadrocket, which is one of the villages at Loch Ness. And so she probably saw it around April 1933. And now, this was during the time of the Great Depression. So people were in economic straits. So this kind of story did kind of tend to carry some interest and weight for and excitement. So once that story came out, some other began to trickle out. But at this point in time, it's only local stuff covered by the Inverness Courier and a couple of other Highland newspapers. But what things really took off in July 1933, where we have the George Spicer case. So we have a sketch of what he claimed to have seen crossing the road in front of him.
Right. So it's
So-
land-based as well.
This was the first land-based story. Now, people were thinking, well, it's one thing, something floating about the water, but goodness sake, what's happening here? We got something that he described as akin to a prehistoric monster crossing the road in front of him. So with a large bulbous body and a kind of writhing neck, with something stuck to it, which some think is a lamb, which was exaggerated, or the tip of its tail behind it. So once this story came out, I mean, it was so incredible that the newspaper editor had to try and explain it away by saying it was a line of otters crossing the road. But George Spicer and his wife were interviewed by a sea serpent researcher called Rupert T. Gould, who would be the first person to write a book on the Loch Ness Monster, first serious book. And it was the drawing, the sketch you see, which was drawn with the help of George Spicer for Gould's first book. So with the help of Gould, knowing the width of the road it was crossing, he decided that this creature was actually about 25 foot long, including the neck. And I think they were supposing there was a large tail involved. Most monster reports kind of gravitate around this 30-foot length creature, dark grey in colour. About 1/3 of it is neck, 1/3 of it is body, and the other third is tail, roughly speaking. Small head, 4 appendages of some sort. So Spicer saw this cross the road. I mean, he knew nothing about Loch Ness Monster. He was just up on his holidays from London and heading back down. So this story was picked up immediately by the national newspapers in Edinburgh, London, Glasgow, and this is where the Loch Ness Monster really took off, and people began to sit up and take notice, saying, well, what is going on up there? We never heard of such a thing. Some people speculated, is it a sea serpent that's got caught in the loch? Is it just a seal? Is it a sturgeon? I mean, obviously sturgeons don't cross the road like that.
Yeah.
So it took off at that point, and reporters began to flock to Loch Ness. The Scotsman is particularly noted for its research into this area, and Gould himself was the first expedition to the loch in November of that year, 1933. He hired a motorbike and went around the loch collecting eyewitness testimonies, which was very important to corroborate what was being written in the newspapers. So we had multiple sources here. So he approached it in a very methodical way, collecting eyewitness testimonies, sketches, and so on. And he collated them all into his book called The Loch Ness Monster and Others referring to sea serpents and so on, in 1934. So that was the first serious work.
So
And
if
yeah.
he's gone around the loch collecting information from locals living on the loch or around it,
Yeah.
how much information did he gather then from that book that sort of told us that a lot of the locals knew about it but hadn't previously spoken?
Yeah, he collected, well, once the story broke internationally, he spoke to locals, and he spoke to people who were quite old, 70-year-old, and they're saying, oh yeah, I saw it 40 years ago, towards the end of the 19th century. So he's picking up stories from the 1890s, the 1870s to back up that this thing had been seen, decades before, and it wasn't just a new visitor to the loch. So he collected all this. He wasn't too interested in the folklore stuff. He was more interested in what was before him, the eyewitness testimonies. And he must have collected about 70 reports, including the Spicer one. It's a very nice thick book, sketches, descriptions. It's one of the best books, even though it's the first. An important historical item as well.
Yeah, nice.
He helps us to cross-correlate, cross-reference, and analyse other testimonies and so on to prove that there's a degree of reliability and accuracy in what people are saying. People are actually seeing large objects in the loch. They're not being fooled by birds or logs or boats and so on. So that took off. 30s, we get the first photograph of the Loch Ness Monster shortly after, the Hugh Gray picture. So the first picture there, you'll see something which looks like a hump in the water. This is a contact negative, positive print done some years later. This photograph was taken about November 1933. It's picked up by the Daily Record of Scotland, touted as the first picture. There were other photographs, but they either didn't turn out very good. This one he saw was near in his hometown of Foyers, where there was an aluminium factory on the south side of the loch. He basically said the loch was like a mill pond as he went on his Sunday walk, and he saw this great commotion in the water and this hump and what appeared to be a tail or neck writhing and splashing about. Now, if you look at the picture, I mean, there's a bit of haziness about it.
Yeah, I did look at it, Roland, and to me, I mean, obviously, people have analysed it. I'm not involved in the subject as heavily as you, but just looks like a little bit of motion blur. It's like you said, it is a strange one.
There's a bit of blur involved, motion blur. Maybe some light has got into the box camera as well. We can't be entirely sure. They examined the negative and found no evidence of tampering or double exposures and so on. So, but if you look at the second Hugh Gray picture I've sent you, we can zoom in to the right-hand side of the object and see what looks like a head on the right-hand side. So it looks like a fish head. Contemporary reports also noticed this oddity and said it looks like a seal head or something like that. So it's we're not sure entirely what we're looking at. It's a head. It's conical. It's casting a shadow or reflection as we should expect. Its mouth is open. There's indications of a small eye near the mouth. Some could argue it looks like a giant eel, except eels don't have large humps. So we're still trying to decipher this photograph to this day. But for many years, an inferior quality photograph did the rounds, and we never saw this head or anything. It's just a hard picture to decipher. But we've got something which indicates that there indeed was some large, strange living object in the loch at that time.
So, just to butt in a moment, so the sightings in 1930s, did they ignite? Do you think they ignited sightings in other parts of the United Kingdom due to being reported in papers? Because I spoke to you 10 minutes before we came on, and I think you were aware of it. And there were a sighting in Filey in March 1934 by a Coast Guard. His name was Wilkinson Herbert. And nice name, isn't it? And this guy claims that it was on the beach in the cove at Filey, and it had huge saucer-like eyes, a mane, and a head like not unsimilar to a horse. Do you think that sightings like that are, well, it could be genuine anyway, but do you think in part it's because of the Loch Ness monster hysteria?
Yeah, I mean, in 1934 we had real hysteria at Loch Ness. People were lining up to go to the loch, and this catalysed other reports from other places. The one you mentioned, the sea serpents.
Yeah,
I mean, I've seen various reports of other Nessie-like creatures, 2 humps, long neck, and all that kind of stuff, been seen in other parts of Britain. Some of the lochs, Loch Lochy, Loch came in for some treatment as well. People claimed they saw things there. Not necessarily at that time. Some would be harkening back to years before. But the sea serpent connection was definitely uppermost in a lot of people's mind. Was the Loch Ness monster a sea serpent that got trapped in the loch? It made its way down the River Ness from the Atlantic Ocean through the town of Inverness, and it was trapped. Some people think that's a good theory of how it got there. So sea serpents, other loch monsters, lake monsters as well were being reported from Lake Okanagan in Canada.
Yep.
Called Ogopogo properly. That one of the first tourist booklets on Loch Ness Monster mentions Ogopogo as well. I'm not sure of how any Lake Champlain also had a monster, but that had been reported in the lake, before Loch Ness Monster, back in the 19th century. And we have Lake Sturgeon in Sweden. All these things, people were saying, hey, what about us? We got a monster too. Unfortunately, nothing in England, I'm afraid to say.
No.
No lakes.
No, that's kind of unfortunate. I mean, Les might know of something. I don't know. I mean, I think Les has had a look at some of this, but
no lakes, just rivers and sea serpents.
Okay.
It's pretty odd. I don't think England has much in the way of lakes. That's the problem.
Well, a few years ago, I was looking into a UFO incident, we'll call it, Wilsthorpe, and I ended up in the tiny village of Wilsthorpe, and I spoke to a coast guard a retired coast guard, but then from Bridlington. And I asked him about if he'd seen these objects or he'd got any knowledge of them that were seen in September 2009. We'll be going to the serpent in a moment. And he hadn't. He knew nothing about it. But interestingly, he said he's ex-Royal Navy. He said, we used to work as an engineer. He said, and on a night, he said, you could climb up the ladder and walk around the gantry of these huge chimneys. The funnel chimneys on the boat, the sort of Navy ship. He said, and we did that. We weren't supposed to, and we'd sort of take fresh air and we'd be out there. He says, and we were in South China Sea. He said, and I saw a sea serpent. And he's in a large warship. And he said, there's moonlight. He says, and it's just going at the side of the boat. And he said it was as long as the warship. So he said, and it just meandered off and disappeared in the South China Sea. I mean, I didn't press him for it. He volunteered that bit of information. I'd gone looking for a UFO type information, but it was quite interesting. It sort of stuck in my mind that he gave me that. No sensationalism, just related a story. So I suppose, the people are out there, aren't they?
We're always interested in hearing these reports so they're not lost to us. So we get them on paper or on electronically, before the oral side of it disappears. But I should mention the surgeon's photograph, which is the most iconic image. That photograph held sway as the de rigueur image for 60 years, taken by a London Harley gynecologist called Kenneth Wilson. He claims he was at fishing at Loch Ness or something like that and saw this great beast neck break the water about 200 yards from him, and he took several plate photography in those days, got them developed, and there's two pictures taken, one which was the well-known image and a second one which shows something in the act of submerging. So that was sold to the Daily Mail, April 1934, and it was a sensation. This graceful, poised, long neck, head, it grabbed everyone's attention, and it just increased the mania.
Right.
As people flocked the following few months later, the summer to Loch Ness. Admittedly, not as many as today, I must say, but for 1930s, a lot of people were going up there. But it turned out 60 years later to be a hoax. So, 4 months before Kenneth Wilson took the picture, the Daily Mail had employed a big game hunter called Marmaduke Wetherill to go and investigate the monster and solve the mystery. He went up there with his team, and within days he found footprints on the shore, tracks. These were plaster cast, like Bigfoot, and sent off to the Natural History Museum in London, who pronounced them to be hippopotamus tracks. So this is a bit embarrassing for the Daily Mail.
So much for that guy's credibility as well.
Somebody thought a local trickster had done it, but it turned out that Marmaduke Wetherell had done it to get some press, you know.
Yeah.
So he gets short shrift, made up some excuses, and he left the Daily Mail. But it appears they left under a cloud, with his reputation somewhat tarnished. So apparently, according to his stepson, who was interviewed in the 1990s, he was around 90 years old at that time. He said that Marmaduke Wetherell swore revenge on the Daily Mail by faking a photograph and selling them to it. So he got his stepson, Christian Swirling, to devise a toy submarine with a what we call plastic wood, a kind of sculptured neck stuck on it with lead weights to counterbalance it properly. It seemed to work in his pond in Twickenham when he tested it. So off they went to Loch Ness, Marmaduke Wetherell and his son Ian. They took the picture and sold it. Now they were going to expose the Daily Mail and come clean just to embarrass them, but apparently they took flight because the thing was so popular, and they probably felt they'd be sued to be sued to the hilt by the Daily Mail if they owned up. So it stayed that way for 60 years until a couple of researchers, Alistair Boyd, who's had his own sighting of the monster, he's a believer, and David Martin pieced together a 1975 press clipping which hinted that this was a hoax, and they managed to track down some of the relevant parties and published it as a book 20 odd years ago. So unfortunately, it's a hoax. A lot of pictures are hoaxes. Some people like to chance their arm, make some money out of it, or just have their moment of fame in the sun, and they happen right up to the present day. So you have to have some degree of circumspection about these things.
How much, Roland? How much of the hoax photographs from past to present day gets in the way of what you're doing and is used to shoot you down? Because you seem to take you're looking at it really serious, but also with a skeptical eye, which is good. So how much of it interferes with what you're doing and kind of suppresses you a little bit? Anything?
I'm not as skeptical as some. I did say I'm pro-Nessie, so I'll
Well, I know you did, but
sometimes give them the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
So I have a slide.
You're still coming across as fairly level in your approach to it, which is good. It's got to be good.
Yeah, I mean, I made mistakes. I've said I think this is something, and it turns out not to be, and I've been fooled as well. But that's the way I like it.
Yeah.
I'd rather get something right and something wrong rather than being just taking the position that every photograph is a fake, so you never get anything right. So you got to take some risks.
Yeah, I would agree. And if it turns out to be wrong, hold your hands up. I mean, I've done it myself, and a lot of people want to run with the myth and the fantasy of it more than they want to actually realize that some things aren't always the Loch Ness monster or the true UFO. You know, it's out there, isn't it? The fraudsters and the fakes are out there.
I take the old saying that he that never made a mistake never made anything. That's the way I approach it.
That's good. Just before, obviously, we're here to talk to you and hear your experiences, but I'm just keen to know your views on the word monster. Do you think that's because they call it the monster and it conjures up images of those early stories where it leapt out and tried to eat people? Do you think it's doing it justice, the word monster?
Probably not. That was an editorial device of the Inverness Courier. Back in the 30s, they had to call it something.
Yeah.
The Loch Ness something.
It doesn't sound as good as the monster, does it? I agree.
The monster suited nice because it was a monstrous thing. Monstrous as in big.
Yeah.
And potentially fearful. Who wants to meet a 30-foot monster, a 30-foot animal of any description, especially if you don't know anything about it? It might turn around and take your head off.
Yeah.
So, or it may be a herbivore. Who knows until you know enough about it. So, some people, there was a pamphlet published in 1934 called The Loch Ness Animal by Udemans. So he was a sea serpent researcher. He tried to tone down the debate, but it never stuck. The media just loved that title, Loch Ness Monster.
Yeah.
Nessie turned up a little later as a name. Some people think it's a kind of feminized version of the Gaelic for Ness. So that comes along as well. But a lot of monster researchers don't like the word Nessie. They prefer Loch Ness phenomenon mystery. Or I'm quite happy with monster myself.
Yeah. Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, I don't think anybody at this stage is ever going to change it. It's there. It's Loch Ness Monster. It's ingrained in time, Roland,
No,
isn't it?
continuity.
Now, we'll just go to Les briefly, just to see if there's any questions in. Have we got anything, Les?
Yes, great show so far, guys, and it looks like everybody in the chat's enjoying it. And I've got to say thank you, everybody, for joining the live stream this week. Great guest on tonight, Roland Watson, Nessie historian, expert, call him what you like, he knows everything. Great questions. I'm going to start off with a question from Richard on Solent. Do you believe there's a monster living in Loch Moray, or any Welsh lakes? Thank you.
Yes, there is a monster in Loch Morar. His name is Morag.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, there's been plenty of sightings of Morag. The famous case was in about 1969, where two boatsmen alleged that Morag rammed their boat or collided with it, and they had to fend it off with paddles and oars, and so they claimed they took a shot at it. Some people claim they made it up, but I don't think so. There was a sighting on the same day of 3 humps by other people, so I think that's been corroborated.
Yeah.
There was even a Loch Morar project, an offshoot of the Loch Ness groups, which went over to specially investigate it in the 1960s and 70s under the leadership of Adrian Shine, who is one of the leading Nessie experts. So, Loch Ness experts. So he and others didn't find anything, but Loch Morar was quite clear water. So there's more chance of seeing something, because Loch Ness is like a gigantic cup of tea. It's just so peaty and dark and very hard to see anything below a certain feet. But sightings today in Morar continue. I've been to Loch Morar myself. Beautiful place, remote. It's a wilderness, untainted by tourism like Loch Ness. Well worth a visit. But I plan to actually go within the year. I love going to the place. I think that there's actually probably more chance of seeing a monster in Loch Morar than Loch Ness.
Really?
In my opinion.
Geographically, Roland, how far away is it from Loch Ness?
It's to the south and west, about an hour, 2 hour drive.
Yeah.
On the roads. It's not too far, but it's the west coast of Scotland, basically, near Mallaig and Skye.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
as
for the Welsh Lake, they've got Lake Bala, which has a reputation for a monster. I can't see how a monster could get there, because it's up in the mountains. It's quite far away from the ocean, the Irish Sea. But there has been some credible reports of something in there too.
What about? No, I'll ask that in a while, because Les has only questions. Fire away, Les. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry for interrupting you at the end of that, Roland.
More questions.
Mike Park, I've got a good question from Michael Park. Welcome to the show, Mick. Question for Roland. What does he think about the Aleister Crowley and the Loch Ness Monster Association theory?
Not a lot. No, Aleister Crowley was a magician. And he took up residence in Loch Ness. He bought a house in Boleskine House, in order to conduct some rituals. I can't remember what they're called, Abrahamic rituals. He scoured Britain looking for the right place, and it turned out to be Loch Ness by some strange coincidence. And this was about Edwardian times, about 30 years before Loch Ness Monster hit the news. He did all these rituals, try to summon up angels or spirits or demons. Whether he actually succeeded, we don't know. Some people claimed he did, and that unleashed something. But the point is, there was legends. There's people seeing monsters in Loch before Crowley arrived at Loch Ness. I mentioned these people that Rupert Gould met, who who saw things in the 1870s and 90s. Crowley left the Loch. He went to India or somewhere like that to continue his various practices. But once the Loch Ness monster came big news, they did try and track him down and interview him. And Crowley tried to claim some credit for unleashing something, but he's nothing to do with it really, as far as I can tell.
Okay.
The monster was seen before him, long before him. He's an interesting side story to the Loch Ness lore.
Yeah.
He used to try and dissuade people from visiting his house by saying the dinotherms are out today, which are a form of dinosaur. So he definitely, him and the locals never saw eye to eye, and they both kept out of each other's way. So we don't know much about his time at Loch Ness, to the truth be told.
I was just going to say, how long was he there, Roland?
Probably only a few years.
Yeah.
The house was eventually sold. Whatever he set out to achieve, whether he did it or not, it sounds like he no longer had need of the house. He went there to a specific purpose in mind. He either achieved it or he didn't, and then he moved on.
Yeah.
Okay. He was a great mountain climber, Crowley, so he loved doing the Munros and all that around Scotland.
Okay, right. We'll just see whether Leslie's got anything else to ask us.
Yeah, I've got a few more here. And Jeremy Brooks, good question that, Mick, by the way. Thank you very much for that. Jeremy Brooks is asking, does Roland have a theory on why there is no remains of Nessie and have never been discovered?
Yes, I do. And a lot of people who even don't believe in the Loch Ness monster agree that Loch Ness is a big cleft in Scotland. It's basically a geological fault. And basically the loch is like a big V-shaped trough, which at the bottom is some meters depth of silt, which is gathered over the millennia since the last ice age. Now anything that dies in Loch Ness basically sinks to the bottom. There's no real shore to wash up on. Now when something dies, everything that dies sinks basically, because when they're alive they're constantly having to stay afloat. The reason things float to the surface is due to decomposition. When a creature decomposes, you have decomposition gases building up. The dead creature balloons and it begins to attain positive buoyancy and begins to rise again. That's when we find carcasses washing up on shore. But in the case of Loch Ness, it's so deep, over 700 feet deep. By the time the dead creatures hit bottom, the water pressure is so great it compresses any gas bubbles and prevents them expanding. So anything that stays at the bottom goes to the bottom of Loch Ness, stays at the bottom, and is scavenged away by eels or whatever. There's that. The time window for bloatedness is probably quite short, but it's suppressed and the scavenging takes place. So nothing. There's a local legend that the loch never gives up its dead. That's scientifically, that is a true statement. You're not good. The only way to find the carcass is to go down there and find them with ROVs and other scientific equipment, sonar and so on. Excuse me.
Okay.
Yeah. I've got another question, and then I'll do some more later on, if that's all right with you guys. Yeah. Aldo Rain is asking, what is Roland's favourite piece of evidence supporting Nessie?
I like the Hugh Gray photograph. I like that head in the picture. I like a few other photographs, such as Peter McNab, which will come up later. I've sent you an image of. That's probably one of the best pictures of a large hump crossing the water towards Urquhart Castle. So it's quite a scenic photograph as well. I like the Roy Johnson photograph, which we'll come to later. But ultimately, to me, it's all about the corpus of sightings. We have over 1,000 reports by credible people. People have seen this thing up close. They could almost see the white of its eyes. There's people like John McLean in 1938 who saw this thing from 60 feet away, a head and a large body and tail. Greta Finlay, who I'll mention later. All these close-up sightings, and do people really want to turn around and say it's all lies and misidentifications? Just complete nonsense. You just cannot say that no one has ever described properly what they're seeing. So it's the sightings. I like the eyewitness sightings, close up from honest people. They're not liars. What they saw, they saw. And they can't explain it either, a lot of them. They're just going to tell us what they saw. And when you see something like that, it burns into your memory. It's not just a fleeting thing. They'll remember these things for the rest of their lives. So it's the sightings, these key sightings. John McLean, if you know your Loch Ness monster research, Greta Finlay and so on. These people are not liars. People like to think they're liars, or there were such bad eyewitnesses that they could mistake a bit of wood for a large creature. I'm not accepting that. People do misidentify things, but it depends on the circumstances. So there's plenty of good cases. Some of the photographs I mentioned, films with Tim Dinsdale and so on. There's not that many films around. A lot of mobile stuff, but mobile phones are not very good at taking films of distant objects.
Okay, superb. Thank you. And we'll leave that for questions for 20 minutes or so. And before we move on to what you've termed the silent years, just touch on something, just humour me, because I don't know if you've got much time for this, but what about the paranormal aspect of the things that are seen? How much credence do you put into that?
I used to believe it myself.
Yeah.
Back in the early 80s. I'd gone through my kiddie dinosaur plesio phase. But then at some point in time, for some reason, I was quite interested in occult and paranormal. I read a few things. Somebody claimed that Nessie was a tulpa,
Yeah.
which is a thought form. Or today it might be called a zoo form, which is just basically a kind of non-biological entity. So, I mean, the supernatural thread was there long ago. I just mentioned water kelpies. Water horses were regarded as supernatural creatures of a demonic nature in this case. That thread died out with the traditions. It resurfaced in the 1960s when I was born. There's some researchers like Ted Holliday, who I just mentioned in regard to the McCrae film. He took the view that the creature was some kind of vertebrate, but he changed his mind somewhat, and he wrote a book called The Dragon and the Disc, where he said he tried to juxtapose UFO cults with dragon cults, and he took the view that it was somehow supernatural, yet still physical form. And he had been reading stuff by people like Jacques Vallée, the UFO researcher, who I believe wrote a book called Passport to Magonia.
That's correct, yeah.
Which took the view that UFOs and other phenomena are not the nuts and bolts phenomena we think they are. Going back to fairies and whatever else, strange and mysterious. He took the view they all had a common origin.
To be honest, I know you're probably not going to agree, but I would be with him on that. I think there's a link to it all. But sorry, carry on. Sorry.
So Ted Holliday, who was a contemporary of such writers as John Keel, Jacques Vallée, who took these supernatural paranormal views, he jumped on board and tried to integrate the Loch Ness monster into this kind of grand unified theory of paranormal everything. So the trouble was, how can I put this? Once the underwater pictures of 1975 were taken, he kind of asked the question, how can he photographed something paranormal underwater. So he kind of backtracked a bit, but he still held to that view as far as I can tell for the rest of his life. Some other people have picked it up. There's a writer called Tony Shields who actually faked a photograph, famously called the Loch Ness Muppet. But he took the view that he said it was paranormal. He wrote a book called I can't remember the name of the book. He was into the Owl Man of Cornwall,
Right.
and dancing naked witches. So he was into all that, and the Cornwall sea serpent called Morgawa, which is also faked by him, a famous photograph. He took the view it was a kind of paranormal squid, which is a total load of nonsense. But he took the view it was some kind of Cthulhian creature, terrible and abhorrent, but supernatural in some sense. Nobody actually has explained to me how these paranormal entities come and go, how they move through water and so on. But I've taken the Occam's razor approach.
Yeah.
Paranormal would explain a lot of stuff. It's a sledgehammer to crack a nut, in my opinion. So I'm going to stick with the biological solution as best as I can.
It's good enough. And this creature, the Loch Ness monster, obviously it's just air breathing, and there's got to be more. No. Well, we've got pictures of it or reports of it walking over road, and
yep. No, if this thing is a water breather, it'll be seen a lot more often. Imagine you placed a seal in Loch Ness that's 30 foot long.
Yeah.
You'd see it. You probably see it the next day. I mean, seals and other water breathers can dive deep. They can hold their breath for a long time.
Yeah.
But ultimately, they've got to break that surface. Now, they can do it quite subtly and just stick their nostrils out the water. But we do expect them to be bumping into cruise boats and things like that all the time.
Yeah.
So I do understand people thinking that it must be a water breather. Sorry, an air breather.
Do you know, I thought that's what you remember. I thought I've not got this. Yeah, air breathing. Yeah.
I mean, if it was a Pacific Ocean, yeah, fine. I mean, they can hide quite easily in the Pacific Ocean. But Loch Ness is 1 mile wide by 26 miles long. And if this is an air breather, it's a master of disguise.
Yeah.
So I take the view that it takes its oxygen from the surrounding water.
But does that not trounce or trample on the reports of it being on land?
No, I mean eels can cross land. You have mud skippers can come out of water, and so on. Lungfish.
Yeah.
Some animals can come out of water onto land, not for long periods of time. I mean, land sightings are very, very, very rare. I think they average about 1 every 6 years. So you have more chance of winning the lottery than seeing Nessie on land.
Yeah.
Maybe winning the lottery 2 weeks in a row. So it's they can come out of water. We've proven examples of known animals that can do it who spend 99% of the time in the water. But this creature spends the vast amount of time underwater, possibly near the bottom, and it is when it breaks the surface, it's probably purely accidental. So I would liken trying to photograph the Loch Ness monster as trying to liken to photograph an octopus coming to the surface of water. It just doesn't happen. So, but it does happen. Okay, we do have sightings, but they're normally very brief, and the monster generally it normally does not have a reason to come to the surface. Very few reasons. It's a water dweller, and it likes to stay as deep as possible, in my opinion.
How many of these things would they have to be to sustain a population over such a long period of time? I've realised that's hypothetical. I'm just throwing it at you, but got to be more.
It's related to biomass in loch. first you have to ask yourself how much biomass is in Loch Ness, i.e. food.
Yeah.
Now, nobody actually knows how much biomass of fish and other creatures are in Loch Ness. The best estimates we have are done by counting sonar traces of fish. Some people think it's about 24 tons of fish in Loch Ness. That doesn't include the salmon and salmon runs, which happen twice a year as the salmon go in and go out. You also have the trout coming into the loch. So you could, I don't know, double, triple that number in my opinion anyway.
So there's ample food.
Well, it depends on, there's another ratio called the predator-prey ratio. How many tons of predator can be sustained by so many tons of prey? Now, some people have used a ratio of 10 to 1. 1 ton of predator for 10 tons of prey. That would only give you about 2.5 tons of Loch Ness monster.
Yeah.
So, but I don't agree with that assessment. I think the predator-prey ratio depends on the type of animal it is. If it's a mammal, it needs a lot more energy to sustain it, so that the ratio is higher. But if this creature was a fish-like exotic creature, the prey-predator ratio could be 2 to 1, or even 1 to 1 in some cases I've read about. The other thing to consider is the Loch Ness monster itinerant? Does it go in and out of the loch? Some people think it does, and that it's semi-nomadic. The River Ness runs 8 miles from Loch Ness up to the open sea, and there are sightings of the monster in the River Ness going up and down it. We have at least 8 sightings. So some people theorise it does head out to the sea and come back in.
So there's underwater cave systems that lead to the sea or lead to the river?
No, it's just an open river.
Right.
You just swim up. Maybe it does it at night time or during torrents of rain when there's higher levels of water. One sighting was during heavy rain, for example, which suggests when the river's in spate, these creatures are more likely to migrate. So we could have a combination of indigenous and nomadic. As for underground channels and tunnels, well, it might be, but the only way to prove that is to see how much water flows into the loch, calculate how much flows out, and see if there's a discrepancy. That would indicate there's some other outlet.
Have seals been seen in loch?
Yes.
So that would indicate that it's not landlocked.
It's not landlocked at all. It's always been open.
Yeah.
Seals could get up into. Seals are obviously about 3 or 4 or 5 feet long, and they chase the salmon down into the loch. They get trapped into the loch. They normally end up getting shot because they're eating all the salmon by the gamekeepers. So it just proves that animals of some reasonable size can get up and down the loch. Possibly juvenile creatures as well could get up and down. We have no idea what the migratory instincts of the creature are.
No.
So, obviously, salmons instinctively know where they're going. We don't know about these creatures.
No, and the biggest mammals, whales, small whales, have they ever been seen within the loch?
A whale could not get into the Loch Ness.
Right. Yep.
They don't. The Loch Ness monster has 4. Its limbs have a degree. We believe have a degree of mobility on land. I said. So they have a strength of limbs similar to seals, which does allow them to be mobile in water or shallow waters and so on, or on land if need be. So they're not like whales that just totally get stranded in the river. Yeah. There's rumours that porpoises have got into Loch Ness. I'm not sure about that. It's possible, but it'd be a very rare event.
Yeah.
It depends on the spate, the height of the river, and so on. Yeah. But semi-nomadic or indigenous.
Yeah. All right. Before we move to the silent years, as you've termed it, what about unusual light phenomena below water, above water? Have there been reports of that?
Yes. mean, Loch Ness, Tim Dinsdale, who took a famous film in 1960, was a member of the Ghost Society. He believed in all kinds of things, Bigfoot, ghosts, and so on. So he always kept a weather eye open for any other strange phenomenon going on around Loch Ness. So he himself said that when he was coming along the shore about midnight, he saw this blue light rising up out of the ground and just moving away, which he thought was very odd, and he didn't have a natural explanation for that. He also claimed that, or someone claims that Dinsdale told them that Dinsdale had been assaulted by demonic entities in his boat one night near Foyers, and that this has shook him up considerably. The guy was called Eric Beckyard, who was a famous Bigfoot researcher. But he's also in St. Loch Ness, but he thought Nessies were paranormal, and he claimed that Tim Dinsdale had an inkling to that end. But there's no corroborating evidence for his testimony. We also have ghost stories. The Abbey, the old Abbey, which used to be a monastery, was a Georgian fort after Culloden. People have claimed they heard foot soldiers marching around the place, ghost soldiers. UFOs of a sort have been seen flicking around Loch Ness, lights in the sky, but whether these are above the average for any given region, I could not say.
No.
That's the bottom line. Is it above average? I'd probably say I don't know.
Is it, when you're asking, when you're taking reports from people?
Yeah.
I think I already know the answer, but do you ever ask them, have you seen any other unusual phenomena? We'll call it phenomena. Anything else unusual?
Some people volunteer information there. I mean, the monster itself, I've got one report. A guy claimed that he's just fishing and he saw this hump moving around, and he tried to take a picture, and his camera refused to take a picture.
Right.
And
okay.
And when the whole event was over, the camera was working again. I don't know if you want to call that an excuse for leaving the lens cap on, but some people have claimed this Loch Ness hoodoo, where things go mysteriously along and they can't get the camera image they want. Tim Dinsdale went to Loch Mora. He took his boat over there back in the 70s or 60s. And on the water, he claimed he heard a horrendous howling, shrieking noise echoing across the locket in the middle of the night. He couldn't explain what the source of this noise was. Was it Morag or some ghost or what? He doesn't know. That kind of thing would shake you up.
Yeah, without a doubt.
I would have taken to shore and run off. But so Tim Dinsdale, he could have written a few more things about paranormal. I mean, Ted Holliday was another one. He wrote a book he co-authored a book called The Die-Fed Enigma with Jones, I can't remember his name, Randall Pugh, about UF phenomenon in West Wales. And he claimed to have seen ghosts, UFOs and all that kind of thing. He claimed a man in black encounter at Loch Ness as well. He claimed that there was an exorcism at Loch Ness in 1973, and after that exorcism, there was some kind of supernatural event in a house of one of his friends, Winifred Crary, who was a psychic medium, who could claim to find Nessie with a pendulum over a map. And he, after this strange light and tornado hit the house, a day or so after, found this man on the road dressed in black leather gear, just staring at him, his face covered with goggles and a helmet. And he looked at him, walked past him without saying a word. And then when he turned around, he disappeared. And there was no way that he thought this person could have scarpered so quickly, which I can understand because I know the area he's talking about.
Yeah.
So Ted Holliday thought he'd be visited by a man in black, and there's supernatural things going on at Loch Ness.
Interesting. Thank you. And the silent years.
I mean, the Nazi craze, the 1830s, it peaked off as Adolf Hitler began to come into view, and World War II started, 1939. Loch Ness was taken over by the military for training and experimentation. I think they tried to develop for sonar radar there. So various things were going on. So people stayed away from the loch during the war years, during rationing, petrol rationing, and so on. So things went very quiet in the loch. There were still people seeing things, but it wasn't until the 1950s that things began to pick up again. So we have these silent periods where things don't seem to happen much at all. But the silence was broken by Lachlan Stewart, who took a three-humped photograph near over the opposite side of Orchard Bay. Another controversial photograph. Some people think it's just three hay bales covered in tarpaulin. Some people claim they actually confess to it. I cover these things. I mean, when I look at a photograph like that, I don't take the 100% fake or 100% positive view. I kind of have a sliding scale of probabilities where 50% means you're undecided. But if you shift over to 55%, then you're 45% in favour of it being real. So you accept it, but you don't have the same degree of conviction as a photograph you have 80-20%. So you take I kind of grade these photographs according to that. It could take one bit of new evidence to shift it into the negative. It's a fake territory.
And
I think
Stuart, Roland, were you a local to the area or a researcher, somebody who'd come looking for the creature?
Lachlan Stewart was worked for the Forestry Commission.
Right.
He had a tied cottage up in the hills just above, and he claimed about 6 a.m. on that July day that he saw these humps speeding down towards Loch. So he grabbed his co-worker Taylor Hay, ran down to Loch with a box camera, took this picture. He said, "It's a controversial picture. Some believers don't think it's real. It's a fake. But I think there's something to it. I'm giving it the benefit of the doubt just now. I've written 4 articles on this photograph, so people are feel free to read those and make up their own mind. It'd take the whole show for me to read those articles, so that's as far as I'm taking that one.
I'm sure it would. Yeah. So wealth of information, the blog that you've been putting together. Just out of interest, how long you been doing the blog? You did say
12 years
12 years. And
this July.
is it still do you still get a little buzz when somebody comes forward with a bit of new information?
Oh, I like new information.
Yeah. I think we all do, don't we? Yeah.
I mean, the blog, carry on.
No.
I mean, the blog, when I started the blog, it was an ocean of material, or a Loch Ness sized vat of information. So I'd covered all the classic sightings, photographs, and movies. So I've covered most of that stuff. But something's always happening at Loch Ness. There's always someone coming over with a plan or an expedition or an experiment. There's always someone who's got a new photograph or a bit of film or a story to tell. We've had it.
Do you get called upon, Roland, or do you actively go and sort of watch what's happening with the expedition? I realise it's probably going to be miles out in the middle of nowhere, but do you seek this information out, or do you just let it come to you?
A lot of it comes to me. I mean, you can contact people
Yeah.
by email these days. It's much easier to maintain contacts electronically.
I
A
guess,
lot of
I
it's
guess I guess what I meant more specifically is when there's an expedition, for want of a better word, people have come to the loch and they're actively searching. Do you go and seek these people out?
not really. I mean, there was the environmental DNA project a couple of years back. But these are all private expeditions. So it's just by invitation only. So you don't just turn up at these events.
No.
If they have a press release meeting later on, you can make your way up to that. I mean, I live in Edinburgh, so that's a 3-4 hour drive. So it have to be worth your while going up, really. I mean, we get people stationed at Loch Ness, like Steve Feltham,
Yeah.
who can go and interview witnesses and assess things locally. We have Adrian Shine as well, though he doesn't believe there's a monster, but he can chip in with his opinion and ask questions as well to give a balance to the ongoing debate. And then you have people who work there on cruise boats and so on who could give feedback and so on. I've talked to lots of people just getting the latest information and so on. But I do go up to Loch several times a year. I'll be going up in a few days
Yeah.
to collect some equipment I've left over the winter, trap cameras. So they've been scanning the Loch for 7 months. So hopefully I might find they have the motion detector has
That
snapped
would be
something
interesting.
passing by.
Yeah, that would be interesting. Well, you
I'm
you mentioned the guy.
doing up.
Is it Steve Felton?
Yeah, Steve.
And I'm just sort of thinking of Leslie. I think Les has met him many years ago. He'll correct me if I'm wrong, but to be so entrenched in the subject and live there and be involved like he does, what's driving him? Because I understand he's not had a sighting, has he?
He has. In his first year, he saw
Okay.
something going like a torpedo through the water.
All right. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, but Steve admits he hadn't seen anything since. He's not a guy that's easily fooled by wakes or logs. He knows the loch very well.
So
He watched
he
for a
saw
couple
it
of
in
years.
the first year, and he's
Yeah.
been there all them years. It's kind of ironic. I mean, it must be frustrating. I hope he gets to get a good sighting before his time at the Loch ends, should we say?
Well, he's in a good position to see it. It's just a matter of, what can I say? I mean, you can't make it come up.
No.
It's pure luck, really, in some senses. You can try and position yourself in the best position, but it's somebody can turn up the first ever visit Loch and see it right away.
Yeah.
Or you can live by the Loch your entire life and see nothing. Or you can,
Strange, isn't it? You do get that, don't you? I mean, we talk about these strange lights seen out at sea off eastern North Yorkshire, and there's some rock anglers that have never seen them, and trawlermen. Then you've got others that do report seeing them. But sort of jumping from that, because I don't want to bog you down with the light phenomena, the Greta and Harry Finlay image. I don't think we spoke about that yet, have we?
yeah, that's one of the best sightings.
Right.
Back in 52, Greta and her son Harry were caravanning up at the top end of the loch. And then they were just pottering around the caravan and they heard this splashing noise, thinking it was just a boat. And they turned around to be met by this incredible sight of a two-humped creature, maybe about, I can't remember, 15 feet long, a neck with strange protrusions on it, protuberances, just sailing past them. So Greta ran to get the camera, as one would, but it had submerged by then. That was in 1952, and it's been one of the staple sightings, iconic. Any researcher worth his salt knows about Greta Finlay and her son Harry. So a couple of years back, I decided to try and find Harry Finlay.
Do you know that was going to be my next question? Are they still around? Yeah, please tell us.
Greta died some years back. Harry was 12 back in 1952. So today he would be, what's that?
69.
He'd be born in 1940, so that would be
apologies. Yeah,
82. Yeah. So I'm not claiming I'm Sherlock Holmes, but I put on my Sherlock Holmes hat, started looking for him, which is a much easier affair than it would have been 40 years ago, I'll tell you that, because he was basically on Facebook.
Yeah.
So obviously there's a few Harrys I bounced messages off, saying, no, I'm not that Harry, good luck in finding the real Harry. This is where you make mistakes, but you forge on ahead, trial and error. So Harry turns up and says, yes, I am that man, in his late 70s, living in Perth. I said, great, pleased to meet you. I believe you saw the Loch Ness Monster. It wasn't a deer, It wasn't a funnily prepared log. You saw the real deal. So I arranged to go over and do a video interview with Harry in his home. We had a great time. He took me through his sighting. He remembers it like it happened yesterday, which doesn't surprise me. I would remember that the rest of my life, seeing that thing pass in front of you. So I put the video up on my blog, on YouTube, rather. He retells the story, nearly 70 years later.
And people can find
It's
that
great.
on your blog today.
Yeah, it's on my blog.
Yeah,
There'll be a link. He recounts the tale. There's obviously Harry Finlay showed me photos of his mother and so on, and gave me the history of him. There's things like that make your day. You find
Yeah.
someone who's almost legendary to researchers, but he's actually living in just up the road in Perth. So we love to find these people who recount their tales, and they'll say, "Yes, I still believe it. I saw the Loch Ness monster, a big 30-foot critter swimming through the loch. Can't explain it. It wasn't a deer. It wasn't a fish. It wasn't a boat. It wasn't a log." As some people try to, fob these things off. It's a real deal.
How enthused was he all them years later? Was he still animated about telling you the story?
Yeah, yes. Well, you see him on the video. He's
Yeah, I'm gonna have a look. Yeah.
speaking with conviction.
Yeah, superb. Absolutely, and that's kind of quite telling that he's stuck to that line all them years, and he's still adamant. I can understand why you think that that's the real deal.
Once seen, never forgotten.
Very good.
If I saw it, carry on. If I
I
saw that, I'm kind of actually afraid of seeing the Loch Ness monster.
Right.
Because it could become an obsession.
Well, don't you think it has become a little bit of an obsession with us all, not just yourself? When we're looking into it, I mean, you're pretty avid in your research, aren't you?
Yeah, I mean, I just spend a portion of time on this stuff, but I spend more time watching football. Tell you that. So
then, outside of the subject, when you're with friends, when you're with other people, obviously they'll know that you've got an interest in this. But how much time do you devote talking about it outside of subject to people who aren't necessarily interested or as interested as you?
I speak to my colleagues, so on. All my family know about it. Most don't believe in it.
No.
Or they think it's dead. I mean, majority of people won't believe there could possibly still be a large creature in the loch, because the normal line is they would have found it by now, but that's not true. There are reasons why you can't find these things. They say that the most cunning creature is the one that's not yet been found. I think the Loch Ness monster and Bigfoot are fighting for the title of most cunning creature.
Most cunning creature. Now you've just said it now, Roland. So I've got to ask: are there any cryptid type reports around the loch? Bipedal, fur-covered creatures, big cats.
Big cats, yes. I actually caught a big cat a few miles away, up in Bewley. A puma.
Right.
They called it, I can't remember, Felicity or Matilda. 1980.
Right.
They were looking a bit podgy. So they wondered if it had been a release.
I thought you were saying I were looking a bit podgy then.
Can if you want.
Well, my wife does. So they caught a big cat. But
they caught a puma.
Do you get gamekeepers reporting that kind of thing? I don't mean regular, but it comes up.
Yeah, well, some other guy, Steve Featherdam, told me about a guy called Dave who was coming home one night to his house, which is actually quite a remote place, and he just saw this big black dog or cat staring at him from a rocky ledge. I think it was a cat. I have to ask Steve again. Yeah. It was a very cryptid-looking creature, out of place, I would say. And as for Bigfoot, I'm not sure Scotland's big enough to sustain Bigfoot. Others do. Some people have claimed to have seen hairy hominids in Scotland, but none are in Loch Ness. that
No.
I'm aware of. No.
Okay, very good. Thank you. So let's move to Peter McNabb and the photograph, image 11, I think it is. Is it Roland?
That's the hump in the castle.
Right.
Now, before then, the surgeon's photograph was the iconic picture, but once that was found out to be a fake, Peter McNabb's picture kind of became, for me, the iconic image. Obviously taken at Loch Ness, about 1955. He was with his son overlooking the castle, and he said he saw the water disturbing and something beginning to break forth. And he saw these two humps, one large, one small behind it. He quickly snapped a picture of his camera. He took another picture, he said, of another camera, which is now lost. And then it submerged again. And he stuck to that story. No one's ever proven that he faked the picture. I've tried to find his son, but no one's ever of his family's come forward claiming that he faked the whole thing. It's just basically a black hump in the water, one of these old black and white pictures. But it's iconic. It's because most Loch Ness monster sightings are like that.
Yeah.
They're just a single hump, or maybe two humps.
We've
Only
got,
a small. What's that?
we've got a point of reference with Castle, and it looks quite large, whatever that is.
Yeah, the castle's 50 foot high.
Right. Has
So
anybody scaled it then? They must have done, obviously.
it's over 50 foot long.
Right.
But that's only the hump. There's obviously a head and neck and a tail underneath. Peter McNabb thought it was two creatures, which would chop it down a bit. But actually, statistically speaking, if you look at the record data, the sightings database for that period, people were claiming to see a 50-foot creature swimming around the loch, which is out of proportion to the rest of the sightings before and after. There's a theory going around that it was a large kind of bull monster swimming the loch, which has now died, which was the biggest creature in the loch of the number that were there, and that it died because these sightings seemed to tail off in the 1970s. The people stopped recording something of that massive proportion. There was a land sighting of possibly the same creature in 1960, 5 years later, by Torquil MacLeod, who saw this large beast hauling itself onto a distant beach. So Peter McNabb's photograph is published in the Scotsman. It's held its integrity ever since. People obviously would just say it's a fake, but they can't prove it.
No.
You see, it's easy to say something, but proving it's another thing.
So this estimated size of 50 foot and in the 1950s, I think you said, didn't you? And is it possible that if it's real, they were just a large specimen at that time, just like we see huge, monstrous crocodiles, and the bulk of them are probably 5, 6 foot shorter? Or, do you know? Is that a possibility?
Yeah, it's by speculation that this was the bull of the herd, so to speak.
Is that what you meant by the bull? Yeah, got
bull,
you. Yeah,
the bull, the alpha male.
Yeah.
The Loch Ness monster is not immortal. Whenever we talk about the monster, we're talking about a group of creatures of varying sizes. Some are 10 foot, 20, 30, up to this monster, this behemoth. Some will be quite small, indistinguishable from other creatures, so you just don't notice them when you're looking at a loch.
So
the
what about multiples then? Have they been seen in 2s and 3s, or is it all as a singular? I know you said there were two humps, and somebody speculated that there were two creatures.
Yeah, like a mother calf kind of thing. But the most I've found is 3 at the same time.
Okay.
Heading up the loch, but most of them are just single creature. That's it. The vast majority are just a single creature, which makes people think there is only one creature there.
There couldn't be,
maybe
could
two
there?
at most.
Yeah,
Well, be dead now.
Yeah, but
Dead.
still right, yeah.
Some breeding must be going on, or they're coming in from the sea. Basically, I'm undecided of how the balance there.
So in close proximity to Loch, then the sea, how many reports do you get around the peripheral then?
around in the sea.
Yeah.
Quite a few.
Yeah.
I did an article. I drew up a map. I collected all the sea serpent sightings and mapped them onto Scotland, just for Scotland. And most of them are on the west coast of Scotland, around Skye, Mull, Hebrides, and so on. But an interesting number congregate around the north and south of the Great Glen entrance. So the Great Glen is a series of interlock lochs: Loch Ness, Loch Oich, and then Loch Linney, which empties into the sea. So we're seeing these sea serpent reports around the top and the bottom end of these Great Glen.
Yeah.
So there's speculation that they dot around that area, and some of them proceed to go into the lochs, Loch Ness in particular. There is a canal going through the line of loch, the Caledonian Canal. So they can't get through the loch system, LOCK. So they'd only be able to go through any rivers. It's more likely they'll come from the north and the south, given the canal system's getting in the way.
Okay.
But
So,
no, and yeah.
do you want to move on to the film, the Tim Dinsdale film? Do you want to speak about anything about that?
Yeah, Tim Dinsdale is the most famous monster hunter. He's written the most books on the subject. He was an aeronautical engineer back in 1960. He took an interest in the Loch Ness Monster, did his own studies. He went up for his first expedition in April 1960. So that'd be 62 years to almost the day. He actually took the film on April the 6th or 7th, so it was around now. He saw this hump through binoculars crossing the loch in front of him, going across to the other side. He started filming. He caught this now famous image of this triangular looking hump. So he's beginning to run out of film footage, so he quickly got in his car, headed down the hill, because he's quite far away from the loch. He's about 1,700 yards away.
Yeah.
By the time he got there, it was gone, unfortunately. So this film has been held up as prime evidence. I think on balance, it does show Loch Ness Monster. Others think it's just a boat, because the area where it's seen is there are boats moored nearby.
Okay. Right. Yeah.
I haven't actually managed to pinpoint the exact point in the shore in line with the monster. But I think the creature's going faster than a normal outboard motor
Right.
boat. I think it's going faster than a boat. It does appear to submerge as well and just become a glistening water effect.
Yeah.
Others claim that that's just an effect of shade and reflection of a boat identification plate.
I guess it's one of them that people are never going to know, are they, at this stage? You know, your gut feeling is that that's the real thing.
Yeah, on balance.
Yeah.
Its main importance is the effect it had, because it led to the boom times of Nessie in the 1960s and 70s.
Right.
People picked up this film and said, this looks like the real deal. So they formed organisations to start looking for it. One of them being the Loch Ness Phenomena Investigation Bureau, which was formed by the MP David James. Incorporated various people such as Sir Peter Scott, the famous naturalist, and others got involved. It grew to 1,000 members. It basically mounted camera expeditions every year. You'd have professional telephoto camera mounted double reel pictures, rigs stationed at various points around the loch. So they thought they'd have a pretty good coverage of the entire loch surface along these monitoring stations. And they had mobile camera units as well, just in case. But they didn't really find much in the way of good footage. Quite often, if you read Ted Holliday's book, he was a member and helped out in a lot of these expeditions. And the basic problem was weather conditions, heat hazes, You know, basically the thing had to basically turn up right in front of you at times
Yeah.
to get a decent image. And people weren't watching the loch properly because it's quite psychologically hard to keep watching a body of water for hours on end.
Yeah, I would
You
imagine.
get bored, you begin to lose your concentration. So some film footage was taken, but nothing we call game changing. So in that sense, the the Loch Ness Investigation Bureau failed.
So,
But
did that continue from the 60s to the mid-80s, mid to late 80s then?
the Bureau lasted 10 years,
Right.
62 to 72.
Okay.
A lot of good things went on, hydrophone experiments and so on. But then it was kind of taken over by Robert Rines from America, who uh, took a different slant to the subject. He decided, let's go to the creature and go underwater. So he set up, in conjunction with his organization, the Academy of Applied Science, to take sonar and camera rigs to the loch, which are waterproofed, and put them underwater. Which seems a very good idea, but there are some problems associated with that. Very difficult technical obstacles, including the basic fact, as I mentioned earlier, the loch is like a gigantic cup of tea.
Mm.
There's peat stained water from all the rivers flowing in with peat particles. It obviously gets dark as well the further down you go. So there were challenges. By 1972, they'd taken the famous flipper photograph, but that is controversial because what we see today in popular books is what is called the enhanced version. They said it was enhanced by the Jet Propulsion Laboratories at NASA. This is in a day when only big organizations had computers. But when you saw the original unenhanced picture, there's quite a big discrepancy. You can still see a kind of diamond-shaped flipper there,
Yeah.
but it's beginning to move into the ambiguous. Some people claim it's just a track in the mud left by the camera rig. I would doubt about that because the silt is very soft and tenuous, and probably wouldn't leave a mark. But it held sway, this picture, and at the time it generated more interest. And Robert Rines and his academy, as the Bureau were going out, they came in throughout the 70s. Every expedition with sonar, underwater cameras, some just sonar. So by 1975, some new ideas. They came with 2 camera rigs, one which was triggered by sonar. In case something moved in front of the sonar, it would take a picture. They also had a fixed camera, which just took pictures at periodical interviews. So it wasn't quite set up properly because they couldn't quite get. They wanted the camera rig fixed to the rock, the bed, the rock shelf underwater. They ended up just hanging them from boats,
I see.
sonar and camera. Now the sonar camera setup didn't take anything, but they thought they claimed they picked up some sonar traces, and some photographs were taken, which made international headlines in December 1975. They were even published in the Nature magazine, which is a highly respected scientific periodical. What they show are several pictures of what appears to be a gargoyle head. And the other one, which I've given you, is called the body photograph, which shows a
That's
bulbous
image
kind
6,
of.
that, Les. Image 6.
Now, the gargoyle head, it's pretty hard to interpret. When I first saw it as a kid, I thought this is not the Loch Ness monster because it doesn't tally with what eyewitnesses claim the head looks like. So you got to cross correlate all these things and make comparisons.
Yeah.
But the body picture, I think, is genuine. I think that's the body and neck of the monster. Others don't. That's their opinion. Others say it's just a picture of the loch bed because the camera was swinging around in the wind, the wind above, the boat's being driven by the wind. But no, I do not accept that. If you look to the left of that body picture, it looks like blue clear water. to the right, blue clear water. So I think that is in mid-water, whatever it is.
Okay.
And the scientists at the time estimated that the length of that thing was about maybe up to 20 feet long, what they saw, based on how the picture, the angle of the camera, and the lights were set up. So in my opinion, that's a genuine and the only underwater picture of Loch Ness Monster. Maybe the flipper as well, so that's more indistinct.
Okay.
So that caused a sensation, though when people saw it, then the media described the body picture as bagpipes in a snowstorm. So it's the media love Loch Ness Monster, but they like to have a go as well. And
I think that's par for the course in it with all of this. But yeah.
they love it because it sells pictures or now
Yeah.
clickbait. So,
So, what about sound, Roland? Has anybody reported sounds from this creature?
Couple. One famous witness, Alex Campbell, claimed he heard a whooshing noise. But he never saw anything connect
No.
it.
Okay.
Some people have claimed to heard kind of exhalation noises. Some people think the humps are gas filled for buoyancy purposes because the monster rises and sinks vertically, like it was in an elevator.
Yeah.
And they think that's because it discharges gases and takes them on again. So I think it does make a noise, but if it's a water breather, as I believe, then it could make some kind of noise, but exceedingly rare. These kind of
So,
events.
okay, we can either go to the Frank Searle, the serial hoaxer, or Richard Jenkins, the Image 7. Where do you want to go?
Richard Jenkins. This is one of the iconic sightings of the 70s, 1973. Appears in most of the 1970 books. Richard Jenkins was an ex-director of the RSPCA. So he probably knew an animal when he saw it.
Yeah.
He'd retired to Loch Ness, Port Clare, a nice little house there. And he's starting his tractor without an exhaust silencer, and it made a gigantic noise, and immediately heard a loud splash, as if something was diving back into the water. So he went over to investigate, and he saw this kind of neck moving slowly, and then it went slowly down like that. And he saw what he thought were scales in the top of the head and an eye, possibly, or a blowhole. It just submerged, and he never saw it again. It was a weird sight, he said.
Yeah.
I had the neck sighting, basically, which is one of those classic poses of Loch Ness Monster. Around the time he was seeing that genuine monster, we had Frank Searle, who was taking pictures at that time and selling them to newspapers. So some weeks after, within the year after, before Jenkins, Frank Searle had some pictures published that were called the most amazing pictures ever seen of a mocked to be humped neck monster, which at the time were taken to be sensational. It turns out they were all hoaxes. Frank Searle was at the Loch from 1969 to 1984. He pitched his tent and never left till then. And he took a series of pictures. He had incredible luck. No one ever took more photographs than Frank Searle of the Loch Ness Monster, allegedly. So he gained a reputation as a go-to guy. He wrote newsletters to the big fan base. All the tourists went to his exhibition and tent on the south side Loch.
So this guy for over 20 years operated from a tent.
Yeah, and a caravan.
A caravan. Yeah. Conditions must have been a bit harsh in winter, though.
15 years.
15 years, sorry.
Yeah. And he had various Gil Fridays who would become his assistants for a month, who repaid him in kind with sexual favours. This was 1970s, by the way.
Yeah.
And so he had a great time until he was exposed as a fraudster. He'd taken a postcard of a brontosaurus and cut it up into pieces and then blackened it and then superimposed it on a picture of water and tried to sell it as a picture of the Loch Ness monster with a brontosaurus neck and back. That was his big mistake. People said, well, hang on, this postcard looks exactly the same.
Yeah.
So there's a big expose, and he never published any more photographs because everyone knew he's a faker. And he left the loch after a battle with some other monster hunters in 1984. He became a treasure hunter and died in Fleetwood in Lancashire around 2004. His name lived in notoriety
I'm
amongst
sure it did. I'm discredited as well. So I don't know whether we have any more questions, and I don't want to put Les on the spot. Do we have any, Les? Yeah. Do you want to answer a few questions, Roland?
No problem.
Okay then. We've got lots and lots of questions, and I'm keenly looking at the clock, and I probably probably know we won't get through all of them, but so I apologise in advance. But I'll start very quickly with a question from, let's have a look, Bridget Van Bosch, and Bridget is asking, and I think we've kind of covered this in the previous hour and a half. Is there any connection with Nessie and other instances of high strangeness? I think we covered most of that earlier on, didn't we?
You did touch on it, didn't you? But
didn't Roland? Yeah. But it's a great question, Bridget. Yeah.
Some people do believe it. That Loch Ness monster is part of the bigger picture, paranormal picture.
Thanks for the question, Bridget. Space Cadet Lottie question: does Roland have any reports from the locals of the Loch Ness monster walking on land? I know we've touched on a couple of accounts where they've seen him walking on land, haven't we, Roland?
Yeah, we have a few dozen land sightings over 100 odd years. It is mainly locals have seen them. I mean, Spicer, who I mentioned, was a Londoner, but others like Margaret Munro, who was a local resident of Fort Augustus, she saw something at the south end of the loch, just out of the water. Something she said looked like an elephant for colour and texture, but had a giraffe's neck. She's about 800 yards away from it, from the house she was working in. But she had binoculars, which brought it to within virtually 100 yards. She described this thing, which was huge, the biggest thing she'd ever seen. She said she saw of two humps which were shape shifting. These humps were kind of changing shape. The neck was moving side to side like that, and eventually just logged over and went back into loch after half an hour. So I think if you've seen something, if you've been watching it for half an hour through the binoculars, you should pretty much figure out what you're seeing. Some people claim she saw a seal. Yeah. That cannot be true, unless you think she's a totally incompetent eyewitness. Others have seen things. Most land sighters have been on the south side of the loch, which is quieter and closer to the loch shore. One guy claimed that the monster was on the road but wasn't moving, and his car came up to it and had to stop because he couldn't get past it. And this thing just slowly slithered off into the loch and left a gigantic depression in the grass as it left. Others have seen claimed most of them are just on the beach or by the side. Some have crossed the road in front of them. We have the last land sighting probably was about 2010 or 11. Ian Monkton took the only known photograph allegedly of the monster on land. It was at night time and he droned up to a lay-by. He heard some splashing noises or something. But he couldn't see what was happening down below, so he got his flash picture from his mobile phone. And then he heard something that he claimed that it sounded like a car being thrown into the water when he took that picture. And the actual picture shows something that looks like a gigantic roast chicken. With a back and some kind of appendages and the beginnings of a long neck. So it's a very fascinating picture. But unfortunately, it was taken at night time. If it had been during the day, it had been a total worldy, you know. So he was there. That was the last one. Others are fake, are dubious because what they describe is inconsistent with what other people are saying. Some people have seen it before the Nessie era, going back to the 19th century. And the legend of the Kelpie coming on land, disguised itself as a normal horse, may well have sprung from these stories of these monsters on land
Okay.
coming on shore for whatever reason we do not know.
Okay, then, Roland, not to cut you down on that one, but I bet he's got a few more questions here. We'll just get through them. Otherwise,
Let's do the questions.
yeah, that's brilliant. Come on, Les.
Yes, this is kind of a follow-on question, Roland. Andy Ross, Ghost Whisperer, is asking, how often has Nessie been seen on land or moving across the land?
Probably just answered that,
I'd
really.
say 36 times over 150 years.
Thanks.
Most of
Thanks,
them
Andy.
in 1933, 1934. We had half of them happened in this 2 or 3 year period. Fascinatingly enough, they're very spread out after that.
Okay, I've got one from V. McCrinnan. What does Roland think about other Scottish loch and coastal creature reports which are similar to Nessie?
We've covered Loch Mora. That's a genuine cryptid. There may be one in Loch Loch and Loch Lochy, but that could be the Loch Ness monster just moving to the nearby loch. There aren't really. Others have legends, water kelpies and all that, but
What about Loch Leven?
no.
No, fair enough.
Sea lochs, Loch Linney, Loch Eel, coastal western seaboard of Scotland have sea serpent reports. Loch Duich, which is a sea loch near south of Ullapool. Loch Treg was an interesting one because divers went down there as part of a hydroelectric scheme, and they claimed that they saw gigantic monsters amongst them as they dove into the deep waters.
Really?
And you had the kind of coming up with white hair stories and that kind of thing. People have claimed to have had diver stories in Loch Ness as well. So I mean, actually, there's a handful of lochs that have or did have cryptids in them.
Okay, thank you. All right, Les.
Patricia Adams Wright is asking, does Roland believe this monster is just a visitor in the loch for feeding?
I don't think it comes to feeding a lot. There's more food out in the ocean, you know. But I think the salmon runs and trout and so on provide an abundance of food at various times. But as I said earlier, I think it's partly indigenous, partly itinerant. So it tends to get its food from a variety of sources.
Are there any particular months that are more prominent then over all these decades? Meaning, do you think it's following the salmon?
The frequency of sightings is skewed by the population of humans. There's more people at the loch in the summer, so naturally it's going to be seen more often.
Yeah.
So it's pretty hard to re-weight it for population statistics.
Okay.
I tried it once. It did seem to be seen more often in the winter for some reason. But because there's so many tourists around, the sightings peak normally in the June, July, August period.
Right. Okay.
It's hard to separate that data out to get a true picture.
Okay, we'll go to another one.
Yeah, well, Patricia has got a double question in here tonight because the next one is from Patricia, and it's for you, Paul. Really,
right.
What are Paul's thoughts on the monster? So that's solely for you, Paul.
Until speaking with Roland tonight, I mean, I've not really done any research on it, and well, obviously I still haven't, but it's intriguing, and I think by sheer fact of the overwhelming amount of reports from individuals, and I find myself saying it with other things that I look into, then there's got to be some truth attached to this. So I don't mean Roland's convinced me that it's there, but I do think there's something there. And listening to Roland relate all these accounts, like we said, from individuals who are unconnected to one another, and the hoaxers mixed in with it, I think there's something there. What it is, I don't know.
No smoke without fire.
No, good point. Les?
Yeah. Okay, then. Thanks for that, Paul. And
That's a double question you said.
well, yeah, she got one. I meant she got one in earlier.
Oh,
yeah.
sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's have a look. I have lost my little line here, I think. Right then.
We're never going to get
Right,
through
there
them.
we
There's
go.
35 questions because Paul was doing moderating tonight. Thank you, Paul.
Yeah, you're doing a great job, mate. And thank you very much. Right then, Paul took a question: is underground water systems linked to the loch? Now that we have talked about earlier on,
Yeah.
Roland. But if you want to
Not proven.
answer that one, not proven. There we
Well,
go. Okay, thanks for the question, Paul. Dragon Noir is asking, do you think there's a connection between UFOs and the monster? Another one we touched on earlier, Roland.
In that, my opinion,
Yeah.
no.
Yep.
Yeah, some of these questions, guys, you might just have to relook at some of the earlier comments from Roland.
In fairness to people who've put questions in, Les, we'd probably not touched on it when they put the question in. So
No, they probably asked him when Roland was talking about the UFOs. Yeah, so fair comments. It's just me for being slow,
no,
I guess.
it's hit Roland with some more.
I'm gonna hit him with some
me.
more. Yeah. And right then, Lee Roscoe is saying, thanks for your time tonight, Roland. Yeah, has anybody caught or got away from a fishing line or net? Anything strange? Anything strange caught in a fishing line or nets?
Nets?
Yeah.
Yes. There's one story. Back in the old days, there's a lot of salmon fishing going on with nets in Loch Ness. It's banned now because of the low numbers of salmon. But back in the 100 years ago, one guy, a relative of Alistair Gray, no, it was Alistair Sandy Gray's name was Alexander Gray. He claimed that they were putting out the nets and just suddenly something grabbed onto them and dragged the entire set of nets into the loch. We've had other stories where fishing lines are getting snapped. They just can't hold on to whatever's diving into the depths. So you do get stories of nets being broken and so on. They're not very frequent, but they do happen. That was more in the days when locals were fishing big time for their food.
I'm mindful of the time here, Les, and I think that we need to be asking Roland where at some point where people can. We know he's talked about his blog, but find your books. Do a few more questions if you've time, Les, but we want to get that in for Roland before we end this.
No, you can do that now, Paul.
Right, so tell people where they can find information and find your books.
Just go to lochnessmystery.blogspot.com.
Okay.
Or just search for Loch Ness Mystery. You'll find me.
And the books that you've written, are they available to buy on?
You'll see information there.
Yep. Thank you. That's short but sweet.
Yeah, and for any new viewers to the stream, Paul, can you tell us where they can buy your books?
Yeah, my website, truthproof.uk, and the books are for sale on the website. The Kindle books are on Amazon. As I've said before, I've removed the paperbacks from there. And I'm interested in reports and accounts, so contact me via the website, truthproof.uk, or my email, paulsinclair.ilf@gmail.com, all lowercase. And yeah, thank you.
Paul Tucker is asking, what are the results from the DNA testing done recently? Do you know anything about that, Roland?
Yeah. They didn't find any reptile DNA. They found lots of eel DNA. It's not surprising. But we're pretty sure there's no plesiosaurs in Loch Ness. So that kind of gravitates towards the air breathing theory. I mean, there was some unknown DNA, which was hard to classify. So there's maybe a line of inquiry about what that DNA might be. But other things weren't found, like otters and cormorants. So not everything was caught by DNA in the loch. So still an open question, but nothing conclusive was found during that study.
And on that note, thanks for that, Roland. Some great questions in tonight, and I'm sorry we didn't get through all of them. We are now stuck for time, so I'll just end the show by asking Paul and Roland to say good night to everybody.
Thank you very much, and it's been a pleasure talking to Roland, and we'll leave last word to you, Roland.
Thanks for having me, and I hope I've convinced a few more people of this fantastic mystery.
Thank you.
Wow, and there you have it, guys. Great show tonight. Roland, our guest tonight, and obviously knows a lots and lots and done years of research on the Loch Ness Monster. And there's a few things in there I didn't know myself. In fact, there's probably most of it I didn't know there myself. So I've got to thank Roland again. I've got to say, just doing a little bit of housekeeping here, I've got to thank everybody who came in with a super chat tonight for us, and that was name shouts are Wendy Rose, Aldo Rain and Nick Brown. And thank you very much for this super chat. And I've got to thank Paul Gledhill for doing the moderating tonight. Great job, and we'll book you again, Paul, I'm sure. And like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And on that note, I have got to say, we are finished. Good night, everybody.